March, the trilogy, is John Lewis's account through his eyes and in his words of being a young person at the center of the civil rights movement. So I want to set the stage for you here. On September 15th, 1963, just 2.5 weeks after the March on Washington, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, a center of voter registration efforts and one of the beating hearts of the African American community in Birmingham, was bombed in an act of terrorism by area white supremacists during a packed Sunday school session. It was Youth Day. 21 kids were injured. 4 kids were murdered: Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, and Denise McNair. So this reading picks up 3 days later in the sanctuary of that same church, which had just been burned, at the funeral service for these 4 girls who were murdered. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaks. This afternoon, we gather in the quiet of this sanctuary to pay our last tribute to these beautiful children of God. These children, unoffending, innocent, and beautiful, were the victims of one of the most vicious and tragic crimes ever perpetrated against humanity. And yet they died nobly. They are the martyred heroines of a holy crusade for freedom and dignity. And so this afternoon, in a real sense, they have something to say to each of us in their deaths. They say to us that we must be concerned not merely about who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderers. And this is John Lewis speaking in reflection. We all knew what Dr. King meant. Governor George Wallace had started his term declaring segregation forever. And 2 weeks before the bombing, he was quoted in the paper saying, "What this country needs is a few first-class funerals." Unless we could give all its citizens a political voice, Alabama would continue to elect people like George Wallace. The evening after the funeral, Diane Nash, another young activist and peer of John Lewis, Diane Nash and I met with Dr. King to present a plan. She and James Bevel were now married and raising a little girl of their own. News of the bombing had shaken them up so badly that she came to Birmingham to propose an all-out revolution. Diane Nash speaks. Dr. King, when children are murdered, we can tell people not to fight only if we offer them a way by which justice can be served without violence. Some in SCLC, that's the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, to which Diane Nash, James Bevel, Dr. King belonged, some in SCLC had talked about marching to Montgomery to place a funeral wreath on the Alabama State House, but Diane's plan went far beyond. Her action in Montgomery would recruit a nonviolent army of thousands of young people to pour into the capital city, cutting off roads, trains, airports, phone lines, electricity, and local businesses until the state government was completely shut down. There were 2 objectives. 1, force Governor Wallace out of office. And 2, allow every adult in Alabama to vote. Now, this plan, Diane Nash's action in Montgomery, it's a real plan. You can find it online. There it is. I encourage you. Look it up. This is history. So the story of March not only reflects this massive social shift, this important movement, mass movement of people, but it also highlights a generational shift within the movement itself between the young activists like John Lewis, Diane Nash, and their older peers and collaborators. Dr. King speaks in response. I agree, Diane, but an undertaking of this magnitude would take significant resources. Diane Nash says, we have to do something. We have to give people a direction, a constructive outlet for their pain and their frustration. Dr. King says, and we will, but not this way. John Lewis reflects, I wasn't angry with Dr. King. I knew he had other concerns to weigh, but we couldn't do nothing. We had to respond, even if it was just SNCC the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, acting on its own, as we had many times before. So we decided to step up our activities in a small city in Dallas County, deep in the Alabama Black Belt, where Bernard Lafayette and others had spent the last year organizing to register black voters. Selma, which sets the stage for history. And that history sets the stage for a future of which we're all a part, a future unfolding in our streets now. In the absence of Congressman, collaborator, friend, and hero John Lewis this morning, I would like to speak in his words, because I know that he would say, if you see something that is not right, that is not fair, that is not just, you have a moral obligation to stand up, to speak out, to find a way to get in the way, to make good trouble necessary trouble. Thank you.